now it's time to discuss Uncle Ben's NCAA picks here on Football Picks, talkingsports.tv. Uncle Ben always on fire when it comes to taking NCAA games, and you could verify that if you'd like by going to UncleBen'sFootball.com. You'll see all his picks, and it's well worth the little subscription fee, believe me. Folks, there's a game of interest this weekend in the NCAA where a lot of the public sentiment is all over Baylor. Baylor on a real hot streak, scoring a lot of points. And TCU plays Baylor this week, where Baylor's favored by 11.5 points. And I understand, Ben, that you have some interesting thoughts about this game.
Well, yeah, Baylor was, rolling it up. They were undefeated 10-0 going into Oklahoma State last week. They got their asses handed to them really in that game. They were never in the ball game. And I think maybe the blueprint and the air has been let out of their sails a little bit. And the blueprint was laid last week by Mike Gundy's defensive squad up in Stillwater, Oklahoma. They really sort of put the grips on this offense, stopping the running game. And TCU's pocketed the cash in 5 of the last 6 meetings in this series, Marty. And they're 8-0 against the spread with rest, 4-0 against the spread as a double-digit home dog. And if you think that Baylor can't stumble into their second loss, I think they're looking for trouble here against their arch rivals at Fort Worth. The Bears are just 2-22 straight up in their second of consecutive away games in that role recently, and they're 1-16 straight up in road finales the last 17 years. And they've had some good teams over those times, but they just don't play well coming in. And I just think the Horned Frogs are going to be in this game all the way. This is their biggest game of the year, emotionally, playing their arch rivals at Baylor. They typically play the last week of the season. And I just think it's going to be a big party time in Fort Worth, Texas this week, Marty. I like the TCU Horned Frogs. Gary Patterson's group is a perfect match for this team. They run the ball constantly. They lead the nation in time of possession, the TCU Horned Frogs, which is the perfect way to go against a high-powered offense like Baylor. Keep them off the field, pound the ball at them, wear them down, keep your defense rested. And I like the TCU Horned Frogs to actually win this game, plus 11.5 points right in Fort Worth, Texas. I just say take TCU this game all the way. Don't go on the Baylor Bears, because like you said, the consensus, the public is all over Baylor in this game. And I just like TCU to win this game outright, plus 11.5 points.
Wow. That's a hell of a tip, folks, because if Uncle Ben's saying that he likes TCU to possibly win this game outright, it's always a nice little security blanket to have those 11.5 points as well. But Ben, kudos to you. And I know you're not one to toot your own horn about your picks. You rather look forward to the next ones as opposed to talk about last week. But you did say a couple of weeks ago that Oklahoma was going to beat up Baylor, and you did put that on your service, on your website, UncleBen'sFootball.com. So, and that happened, and not too many people saw that coming because Baylor was on such a run.
Well, it's kind of like, these teams that get out early and play these easy schedules and then finally meet their matches late in the season. We've been against a couple of these teams. Texas Tech is another team. We were against them last night again. We've been against them 5 weeks in a row. They've lost every time. Now, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. Marty, you're only as good as your next pick. So we go forward, like you said, last week was last week. Okay, we enjoyed that win with Oklahoma State very much. But, there's new fish to fry this week and, more tickets to cash.
Gotcha. South Carolina meets Clemson this week. What do you think happening there?
Well, it's interesting because Clemson, they've only lost one game to the Florida State Seminoles, which everyone's lost to the Florida State Seminoles, bar none. They got blown out that game. But this is the kind of game that Clemson just never wins these big games. Now, Steve Spurrier, the old ball coach at South Carolina, still believes he can win the SEC because if A&M beats Missouri this week and Auburn somehow can beat Alabama, then the South Carolina Gamecocks are in the SEC championship game, and of course, if they win that game, they win the division. So I don't see the South Carolina Gamecocks letting up here. Clemson's 0-4 straight up and against the spread versus the Gamecocks the last 4 years, losing by an average of 17.5 points in those games. So Spurrier seems to have their number, and the hosts are now a perfect 7-0 against the spread against non-division teams seeking revenge. They beat them last year, by the way, Clemson up in Clemson, South Carolina. So I just think that Clemson, like I said, never wins these games. And I liked the Gamecocks to keep their SEC championship hopes alive with a win at home, -4 points against a Clemson team that never wins against good opposition.
All right, so there you go. Take South Carolina, lay the 4 points. Now, USC plays UCLA this weekend, and Ben, you've been taking USC ever since pretty well. They laid off Lane Kiffin as their head coach, and you've been winning. You've been making the right selections. Are you going back to USC minus the 3 this weekend versus UCLA?
Well, yes, I am, Marty. I know that you're not a huge Trojan fan, but does it really matter as long as we get to the ticket window and cash our tickets?
Exactly.
Who really cares what the name on the ticket says?
No.
It doesn't matter to me, and I'm sure it doesn't matter to you either.
No, it doesn't.
Like you said, the Trojans have been a completely different team since Lane Kiffin got out of there, and their defense is way better. Look what Monty Kiffin's done with the Dallas defense. Well, he was the coordinator at USC, so they weren't doing so. Both sides, the head coaching, the defense has really come up. As a matter of fact, they've gone 6-1 straight up, 5-2 against the spread under Ed Orgeron since he took over. The men of Troy are an intimidating 7-1 straight up and against the spread in their last 8 meetings in the Coliseum, also against their crosstown rivals. Don't forget, they're playing their crosstown rivals from Hollywood this week, the UCLA Bruins. So,
right.
They've cashed the tickets in the last 5 Pac-12 home games as favorites of 8 or less. I don't see things changing here. They're moving up in the polls. They got a little bit to prove here. Ed Orgeron wants to get that head coaching job in USC, so a 7-1 finish would really help him, although I don't think he's going to get it. I don't know if he's just not a high-profile enough a name for Los Angeles, but who cares? Like I said, if he's getting the job done, he's getting the job done.
Yeah.
I just think that the USC Trojans want this game badly for, hometown bragging rights. They're playing well. This team's, like I said, on a roll with the new coaching staff. I like the Trojans again this week, Marty, for like the 4th of the last 5 weeks, and they've covered each time. I say they continue the roll, take the Trojans at home, minus the 3 points here in sunny California.
Okay, and finally, Stanford faces Notre Dame this weekend, and Stanford's a 13.5-point favorite. What do you see happening there, Ben?
Well, this is also another rematch from last year. Last year, Notre Dame obviously played in the championship game. One of their big wins was against Stanford at home. But I don't know if you remember that game, but there was a play right at the end of that ball game where Notre Dame didn't get a touchdown. They reviewed it. They looked at it for like 4 or 5 minutes, and they actually overturned it and gave them the touchdown and virtually the last play which won the game. I just see Stanford being an ornery bunch this year. Okay, it's a huge revenge spot for them, basically, like I said, after being screwed in South Bend last year, the referees took that game from them. And I just say, look for the boys of Northern California. They're a physical team. They play well at home. They're looking to get into the Pac-12 championship game if they, next week against probably Arizona State. And I just think the big boys from Palo Alto are going to hand it to the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame this week, minus 13.5 points. The bookmakers want the Notre Dame action. You don't see the Notre Dame Fighting Irish getting 13.5 points for a reason. People like to bet on Notre Dame. They're going to grab the 13.5. I say don't give it to them. Take the Stanford Cardinal to prove their worth at home and beat up on a physically. They're just going to physically outmatch this team on the line of scrimmage, which is what Stanford does. They're a big physical group, and I like the Stanford Cardinal to finish their season at home with a big win over the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, minus 13.5.
Okay, so there you are, folks. Ben's top NCAA picks for the weekend. Take TCU plus the 11.5 over Baylor. South Carolina minus the 4 over Clemson. I'm thinking of Pinball Clemens, my buddy, who's a former coach of the Toronto Argonauts. USC minus 3 versus UCLA. And Stanford minus the 13.5 over Notre Dame. And if you want more, and of course you do want more winners, go to UncleBen'sFootball.com, where you will find not only Ben's picks on the NCAA, but also on the NFL for this coming weekend, Week 13. All the best to you in your selections. Ben, thank you very much for another great week. Enjoy San Diego, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure, and you have a great weekend. Good luck with all your selections.
Thank you. See you next week.